And now Londoners can no longer, if they work for a living in London, they can't afford to live in London. That's all been financialized and sold to wealthy foreigners, and the London wage earners have to move to a London suburb and take a privatized railroad to get to work in the morning. I wanted to explain what the neoliberal goals are in the United States of finance capitalism and how they differ from what China's goals are, and how they differ from the countries that the United States says are our number one enemy. What is it that makes China and Eurasia and Africa and South America the enemy? What is it that makes democracies and elected governments the enemy of the United States? Well, we can go over the goals that in order to prevent the development of countries following China's path and becoming more efficient, they want to avoid any study of how economies work and any idea that some income is not owned. And if you go to the United States to study economics, there's no history of economic thought that's taught anymore. So you're not going to be taught about what classical economics in the 19th century was all about. And you're not going to be taught about economic rent. You're going to be taught that everybody is productive, everybody earns whatever they have, and if some people are billionaires, it's because they earn the money, not because they inherited it, not because they are getting a free lunch or getting rent. It's because they're actually earning all the wealth they have. And so don't criticize the wealthiest 1%. You're not going to learn about rent theory. You're also not going to learn about economic history. Because if you'd studied economic history as part of your economics curriculum, then you'd see the long fight between creditors and the rest of the economy throughout history. The last 2,000 years of Western civilization have been a long fight by society against creditor and landlord oligarchy. And the whole idea of economics is to isolate the oligarchy and to prevent a predatory oligarchy from developing. So even the history of religion has been misrepresented so as to exclude an understanding for how early Judaism and Christianity recognized the need to write down debt after they threatened to impoverish economies. There's no trace in the Christianity of the West of what there was in the original Judaism and the teaching of Jesus that was all about wanting a debt cancellation. They've changed the Lord's Prayer to get rid of the reference to forgive us our debts. They don't want to forgive the debts. They want to sanctify paying the debts, not getting rid of them. So the first aim of financialization is you want to make a loan to a government that it can't pay, and then suppose that you're the International Monetary Fund lending to Latin America. You make a loan that it can't pay and then say, well, your currency is going to collapse because you followed the advice of the World Bank, and we'll lend you the money to stabilize your currency, but you're going to have to privatize your public domain. You're going to have to sell off your public transportation system, your public railroads, your public airlines, your public electric system, turn it over to American and European investors, financial investors. And so these will no longer be a public enterprise. They will no longer be aimed at providing inexpensive electricity or transportation or healthcare or education. The aim of privatizing these public utilities is to raise the price. They're natural monopolies. That's why they were kept in the public domain in the first place. And you'll all of a sudden have a financialized monopoly. capitalism, or a monopolized finance capitalism, you could say. Well, the second aim is you want to privatize the basic utilities, starting with the most capital intensive in the communication sector, and the ones that get rents. Not just privatize housing, you want to privatize housing. And if people have been getting, as in England, most of England had council housing. In other words, it was a public right of all English citizens to get affordable public housing. Under Margaret Thatcher, this is all privatized. And all of a sudden, rents have gone up twice, 4 times, 8 times. Huge increase in prices, and now Londoners can no longer, if they work for a living in London, they can't afford to live in London. That's all been financialized and sold to wealthy foreigners, and the London wage earners have to move to a London suburb and take a privatized railroad to get to work in the morning. A third aim of neoliberalism is you don't want regulation. You want to minimize the regulation of prices. You don't want anti-monopoly regulation that would say, hey, wait a minute, you've taken over these railroads. We're going to keep the fares that you charge in line with what it actually costs you to run the railroads. You want to deregulate everything so that the new railroad owners can charge whatever they want. And the result is a big share of the high railroad costs in the West are economic monopoly rent for that, because it's deregulated. You don't want industry to be regulated. You don't want the behavior of the financial or landlord sector or monopolies to be regulated. The fourth element of neoliberalism is you want other countries dependent on US and European banks. You want to make sure their governments depend on American lenders so Americans can say, if your government does a policy that we don't like, if your government does not sell off and privatize your railroads, we just will pull the plug. We won't give you any more credit. We'll insist that you pay your foreign debts, and your currency will collapse. And so whenever a socialist government comes to power, the Western banks do a currency raid. They all will sell the currency short and collapse it. And without capital controls, these countries will simply be forced to do what the International Monetary Fund and behind it, the US government tells it to do. So you want other countries to be dependent. The World Bank, for instance, tells Africa and Latin America, don't grow your own food crops, grow plantation crops, but buy all of your grain and your food from the United States, so that if you do something we don't like, we can put a sanction on food and we have the right to starve you at any point. So we've created a dependency relation. Obviously, China and the new BRICS group that's evolving is trying to avoid dependency on the United States and Europe so that they can never make these threats of dependency again. Well, the fifth element of neoliberalism is actually the most burdensome element that I've been describing. It's a debt burden. It's especially one that's denominated in foreign currencies. Debts really wouldn't be a problem for countries if they could print the currency to pay them. But Latin America, Africa, and Asia have their debts in dollars. That means that the governments of these countries can't simply print the money to pay the debts. They have to obtain these dollars to pay the bondholders whose debts are denominated in dollars. And that means they have to either borrow even more dollars to pay the bondholders and the banks, or they have to export more in order to raise the money to pay. And as they all compete with each other to export more, the price of their exports goes down and their currency depreciates as they try to pay money that they're not producing. And they get even more dependent on the United States because their debt burden is growing. And the loans that are made by the International Monetary Fund and by the United States Treasury and agencies don't help them repay the debts. It makes them in even more trouble by imposing economic conditions that are the opposite of socialism. Well, the sixth aim of neoliberalism that's destroyed the US and European economy is you don't want to tax real estate or finance or monopolies. You want to tax labor and industry instead of taxing the free lunch economy. Instead of taxing the rich, you tax the wage earners. And that enables the rich to get richer much faster. And as the taxes are pushed onto labor, labor has to pay more and more of its wages, either in taxes, but also to pay for its pension funds, to pay for education. Instead of progressive taxation, you have regressive taxation that falls on the economy's productive sectors. And that is the seventh aim of neoliberalism, a flat tax. You want everyone to pay the same tax rate on income. If it's a flat tax, then the wealthy people don't have to pay a higher tax than the wage earners. Everybody's paid the same, and that prevents the wealthy from being taxed. Plus, they're given all sorts of special tax benefits, depreciation and other factors. All that leads to the eighth characteristic of neoliberalism in the West, and that's a real estate bubble. And a real estate bubble that you have in America and Europe raises the excess price for housing and commercial space. In order to get a home, to have access to a home, you have to pay either a very high mortgage debt to the bank to buy a home, or a very high rent to enable the absentee landlord to pay the bank for the money that the landlord has borrowed to get the property to rent out. So a real estate bubble is what is really making Western labor uncompetitive. And the result is the ninth aim of, or at least the effect of neoliberalism, is deindustrialization. The neoliberal policy is to deindustrialize the economy. It's a class war that in order to prevent wages from rising, you simply move your industry and your factories offshore, move them away from America, away from Europe, into Asia. The effect of these deindustrial policies, these neoliberal untaxing economic rent and the tax favoritism for the fire sector, is the economy at large cannot compete anymore. And that leads to the 10th characteristic, and that's rising debt dependency by the West. It's actually, you may not realize it, but despite the fact that all the attention is paid to South America and Africa, to the global South that cannot pay its dollar debts these days, it's the United States that owes an enormous debt to foreign central banks that hold the dollars that they've lent to the United States. That's what dollarization is. And there's no way the United States can ever repay this debt it owes to foreign banks by earning enough of their foreign currencies to pay, or by selling its own gold stock to pay. The United States has no intention at all of paying the foreign debt that its government owes to foreign governments, but it insists that all foreign governments pay their debts to the United States government, to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and to dollar bondholders. Well, the result of all this is the 11th result of neoliberalism, and that's capital flight. Labor emigrates. If you want to look where the neoliberal ideal has been imposed most of all, it's been on the post-Soviet Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And 20% of their labor has just left, just like earlier, the East German labor was fleeing to the West. The Baltic states were financialized and neoliberalized. All of their public utilities were privatized and sold off to a domestic kleptocracy class. And the kleptocracy has sold stocks and bonds on these enterprises to American and European investors. The result is an emigration. So here you have the United States and Europe losing their competitive advantage. They're running into debt. They're uncompetitive. You can just compare the 11 characteristics of neoliberalism that I've discussed to what China's doing. Well, the most important aim of socialism, not only with Chinese characteristics, but any socialism, is you want public ownership of natural monopolies, especially money and credit creation. You don't want to leave banking in private hands because banking is going to become, they say in America, the mother of monopolies. It'll create trusts and it'll back the landlord class, privatization of land, because it knows that rent is for paying interest. You don't want banking and financial class to act in its interests. You want money and banking to work in the interests of the economy as a whole. The second characteristic of this non-neoliberal socialist approach is you want to keep the basic infrastructure, in addition to banking, in the public domain. You don't want to privatize railroads and education, and you want to provide them at minimal prices. You don't want a private American company to buy your subways and all of a sudden say, we can make more money just tripling the subway fare that people have to pay, and we'll make more money that way. You want the government to provide low-cost transportation so that the workers won't have to have a high enough wage to pay for the monopolists who own the transportation system. Well, the third aim of China and the BRICS countries as an alternative is you want national self-sufficiency. Certainly in money and credit. You want your debt to be owed in your own currency. You don't want to have to borrow from the United States. In the 1990s, the United States hoped that China's government would borrow dollars to spend domestically on its investment. And China said, we don't need American dollars to build our own buildings and to build our own transportation. We can create our own Chinese RMB and ourselves and finance it. We don't need foreign bankers at all. So that was one way in which China avoided the fate of the global South countries that followed U.S. advice to join the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Well, the fourth characteristic of socialism, whether it's with Chinese characteristics or any socialism, is you want to protect consumers and you want to protect labor. You want to protect consumers from fraud. You want to protect them from having to pay monopoly prices for the food and the other products that you get. And you don't want employers to impose awful labor conditions. For instance, in the United States, the great growth company has been Amazon, basically taken over the selling of books and products. And Amazon won't even let its workers go to the bathroom. If you work for an Amazon company, you have to wear adult diapers so that you have to go to the bathroom in your pants so you can be working that whole 8-hour day for the company without going to the bathroom. Well, the fifth element that the BRICS need are capital controls. You want to prevent money that's earned in China from simply leaving it, like emigrating to the United States to make money in the Chinese market. If people get wealthy from the Chinese economy, you want them to recycle the money into the Chinese economy so that the economy gets richer, not foreign economies. Well, part of this that you can make sure this happens is the sixth element of socialist economy. You want the taxes to fall mainly on unearned income, on economic rent, on income that is not necessary cost of production. And if you tax the economic rent, that will prevent it from being pledged to the bank as interest. And that the taxes should fall on land rent. Of course, people have to pay rent to cover the cost of the building, but this rent may be subsidized by the government. But you don't want Chinese homeowners to end up making the bankers rich. You want the homeowners to get the benefit and the government to get the benefit for what it spends, not the financiers. The seventh element that you need is a progressive income tax and a progressive wealth tax. You don't want super billionaires to develop, such as have emerged in the United States and Europe, and especially in the Scandinavian countries, that they call themselves socialist, but they're really not socialist. They do have public support of labor, but you have an enormous concentration of wealth in the hand of Scandinavian billionaires. You don't want that. And the best way to avoid that is progressive taxation. And also the eighth characteristic, you want the land tax to collect the site value. It's called the rent of location that results from public infrastructure being built and just from the economy getting more prosperous. As Chinese labor earns more and more, it can afford to pay more for housing, because that's really what is always defined status in almost any economy, where you live and how nice your home is. You don't want merely the fact that people earn more money to say, now we can afford to pay the banks more money to lend us money so that we can buy this location. If the value goes up, they may earn more money to pay a higher rent, but this money will be collected by the government as a tax base, not by the banks. The ninth characteristic is to use the economic surplus for tangible capital investment. You don't want the surplus to be used in the United States to buy companies and then use them as financial vehicles to exploit by financial engineering. You want industrial engineering to guide your policy. You want the surplus to be for tangible capital investment to improve living standards, and you want to create environmental resilience. You want to prevent disease. You want to do it to prevent the kind of disasters that are happening in the United States, from flooding, from global warming, from all the other problems. 10th characteristic is you want national sufficiency in food and other basic needs. China has to be able to work with itself and neighboring countries, so you feed yourself. You're not dependent on American agriculture, because in the 1950s, America tried to fight against Mao's revolution by saying, telling everyone, don't export food to China, starve them out. Canada helped break this sanction, but you don't want America to be able to do to you what America is trying to do to Russia. It tried to starve Russia out by saying, don't provide any food or agriculture to Russia. And Russia simply produced its own food and its own agriculture, its own cheese. And actually, this turned out to be a protective tariff for this. And the 11th characteristic of socialism and the BRICS countries is you want fiscal and capital controls to prevent speculative attacks on your currency. You want to avoid the ability of foreigners to mount a speculative attack like George Soros arranged on the Bank of England. He arranged a lot of credit, so literally he could outbid the Bank of England. While the Bank of England was trying to support the pound sterling's exchange rate, Soros built enough to raid and to sell sterling and forced it down and ended up winning his gamble that the pound would fall down. You don't want anyone to do to China or to Asia or your friendly countries what George Soros did to England. You want to control the ability of foreign countries to get to take your economy over financially. And an essential element of national sovereignty is the ability to keep banking and credit as a public utility. So those are the main aims of how China, the BRICS countries, can create a different kind of an economy from what's happened in the United States.